want to be able to see my kids and my husband and be there with them through this hard time. Tomorrow it's my stepdaughter's burial and I don't even get to be there, and I'm accused of doing something that I never would have done.
It's just this gut-wrenching image, you know? Reading the material for this deep dive, a stepmother, Renee King, in tears, denying everything, pleading for bail, just so she could go to the funeral of her 2-year-old stepdaughter, Lily.
And the request was denied.
Denied. And then you contrast that image with how Lily's described, full of life, curious, playful, just a toddler. It's more than just recounting a single tragedy, isn't it? The source material calls it the quiet collapse of a system.
Exactly. It points to something much, much deeper than just one awful day.
Yeah.
On the surface, maybe it looks like a custody dispute gone horribly wrong. But when you dig in, you find months, really, of escalating warning signs.
Warnings that were ignored.
Seemingly ignored, yeah. And a mother's voice just repeatedly dismissed by the very people who were supposed to protect her child.
So that's our mission here in this deep dive. It's not just about telling Lily Furneaux's story. It's about trying to understand why. Why was it allowed to happen? How could those warnings just disappear into the system?
How could court decisions just override expert opinions from child welfare folks?
Right. And why were Lauren's fears, Lily's own mother's documented fears, minimized again and again? And maybe the toughest question, how, even after this, did accountability seem so elusive in some ways?
There's a lot to unpack. Let's start where the material does, with Lily's early life. Lily Lynette Furneaux, born May 14, 2008 in Michigan, described as, just bringing light into the room, a bright, expressive little girl.
She lived with her mom, Lauren. Lauren was young, just 22, but sounds like she really embraced being a mother, had help from her parents, a nurturing place. Lily was the heart of the family, they said.
Lily's father, Jeffrey Wolfenbar. Well, he and Lauren had a brief relationship. It ended before Lily was even born.
And then Jeffrey got involved pretty quickly with Renee King. Renee already had kids of her own.
Yeah, so right away you have this blended family dynamic starting to form, and that becomes really central to the custody issues later on.
Which takes us straight to that custody arrangement. And this is where, according to the sources, the first major red flags pop up. July 2008. Lily's only 3 months old.
3 months. Tiny.
And there's a custody hearing. Judge Michael Higgins, Lear County Family Court. He awards joint custody 3 days a week with Jeffrey, 4 with Lauren.
And that decision, wow. It came under intense scrutiny later, not just because Lily was an infant. Separating a baby that young from her primary caregiver for days at a time is questionable.
Highly questionable. But it was also about what apparently happened in the courtroom itself.
Right. The reports say Judge Higgins just dismissed recommendations from child welfare advocates, professionals who had serious reservations about this kind of rotating custody for a baby.
And it gets worse. He apparently called Lauren's concerns totally valid concerns, emotional overreactions. There's even this quote attributed to him. It's shocking. You had a baby with this man and now you're devastated. Too bad, get used to it.
Wow. Wow. That quote alone, if accurate, it tells you everything about the atmosphere in that courtroom, doesn't it? A mother's fears aren't just ignored, they're mocked. Her advocacy for her baby is challenged.
So Lauren had to comply. She followed the order. But you can imagine that feeling of unease. It started right then and there.
And it didn't get better. It got worse. Lauren started noticing changes in Lily after she'd come back from visits with Jeffrey and Renee.
What kind of changes?
She seemed withdrawn, quieter, less talkative than usual, more sensitive. Lauren, she started documenting everything, taking notes, keeping track. But she felt like she was just hitting a brick wall. Like the system didn't want to revisit that initial ruling.
And her own lawyer told her to be careful.
Yeah, advised caution. Said, if you push too hard, the court might retaliate. You could even lose more time with Lily. The advice was basically follow the order no matter how hard it is.
Gosh, so she's trapped. The material calls it a complex, one-sided struggle. She feels this growing danger to her daughter, but she's bound by this court order she can't fight without risking losing her altogether. Every week, those handovers must have been agony.
Meanwhile, Renee King marries Jeffrey. She's now the stepmother, dealing with blended family stuff. But the sources also mention Renee had her own issues. Chronic pain, medication, things that started impacting her ability to care for the kids.
And Jeffrey worked, right? So Renee was often the main caregiver when Lily was there.
Exactly. And Lauren noticed more changes in Lily. Her little girl, once so lively, became more reserved, sort of distant, uneasy about going for visits, just not like herself, Lauren said.
Then it escalated. physically.
Yeah. Lily started coming back with small marks, bruises. Renee would have explanations, oh, she's a clumsy toddler, normal stuff. But Lauren's gut feeling that something was seriously wrong, it just wouldn't go away.
So she documented that too, took pictures, went back to the lawyer.
She did. Meticulously documented it, took photos, sought advice again. But the response was still caution, still worried about the custody battle. It really feels like the system was locked into maintaining the status quo rather than investigating these really worrying signs.
And Renee herself was struggling.
Apparently becoming more irritable, more withdrawn. Signs of being overwhelmed with caring for multiple kids, plus her own health issues. It seemed pretty clear.
Okay, so let's recap the warnings the material points out. A stepmother visibly struggling and overwhelmed. A young child showing clear behavioral changes, anxiety, fear, and now physical marks after visits. A mother carefully documenting everything. And yet,
no action was taken by authorities. That's the chilling line from the source. Lily kept being sent back to Renee's home week after week. Lauren felt completely isolated, screaming into a void, it seems.
the system failed to respond.
The cracks weren't just showing, they were becoming huge holes. The warnings were clear, documented, but the safety net just wasn't there. Lily was left vulnerable.
Which leads us inevitably to November 20, 2010, the day it all fell apart. It started like any other handover morning. Lauren drives Lily to the meeting spot. Routine. But she said it felt different that day. Heavier than usual.
She kissed Lily goodbye. "I'll see you soon, baby. I love you." Simple words. But she had that awful feeling, that pit in her stomach she couldn't ignore. No idea, of course, that this routine was about to shatter.
Later that day, around 1:30 p.m., Renee King calls 911.
And the story she gives is mundane almost. Alarming, yes, but presented as an accident. Lily slipped in the shower.
But when the first responders get to the trailer in New Haven, Michigan, they find Lily unresponsive on the living room floor, and the scene, it just doesn't match that story.
No. The material describes a stillness that comes only after something catastrophic. It didn't look like a simple slip and fall.
And Renee's story starts changing almost right away.
Yeah, under questioning. First, the shower fall. Then, as paramedics and later police pressed her answers got inconsistent. Her story started to wobble. The paramedics knew pretty quickly this might not be a straightforward accident.
They tried to revive Lily, couldn't, rushed her to the hospital.
But it was too late. She was pronounced dead at 3:27 p.m.
And at the hospital, the staff immediately saw red flags. The injuries were just wrong. They did not align with the fall in the shower.
Doctors found multiple blunt force injuries, especially to her head. Totally inconsistent with Renee's story.
Yeah.
And the timeline she gave didn't make sense either.
Foul play was suspected right away. The investigation zeroed in on Renee. She kept insisting it was an accident, but her story kept shifting. Authorities saw gaps, inconsistencies, things she was leaving out.
Right. Those inconsistencies, plus the undeniable medical evidence of severe trauma. It forced a shift. This wasn't an accident. Something more serious had happened.
The investigation obviously ramps up. The community is in shock, outraged, and people start looking back at the court system, the missed warnings, asking how? How did it get to this point?
And then came the medical examiner's report. The definitive, awful truth. Cause of death. Homicide.
Homicide. So the injuries.
Extensive. Especially head trauma, multiple contusions. The report indicated something far more violent than a simple fall.
Deliberate force.
Exactly. The pattern of trauma, the specifics.
Yeah.
It pointed to deliberate force being applied. This wasn't an accident. The evidence was clear.
So Renee's story about falling with Lily or Lily slipping, it just didn't hold up.
Not at all. Didn't match the physical evidence. Under more questioning, she apparently admitted to some rougher interactions. Said she'd handled Lily in ways that were less than gentle when she was stressed or overwhelmed. But she still denied intentionally hurting her.
But the forensics.
The forensics painted, as the source says, a far darker picture. The trauma pattern was consistent with Lily being struck multiple times. Deliberate force, unequivocally, not the accident Renee had described.
And the scene itself raised suspicions too, right?
Oh yeah, big time. The area where Lily was found had been cleaned before help arrived. That immediately signals an attempt to hide something. The lack of expected blood or other evidence was highly unusual.
What about the timeline?
That didn't work either. The severity of Lily's injuries. Experts determined it would have taken a much longer period of time to inflict than the short window Renee described for a morning fall. The injuries likely happened much earlier in the day.
So the conclusion was unavoidable.
Deliberate harm, violence, the forensics confirmed it, and it just threw those earlier system failures into even sharper relief. Patterns of abuse that can go unnoticed, harm from a trusted person, and all the missed signals beforehand.
The truth was hidden behind this facade of normalcy, as the material puts it, and the forensic evidence blew that facade away.
Setting the stage for the trial, February 2012, Renee King faces charges. Murder, child neglect, criminal conduct.
The trial must have been intense.
Powerful testimonies. You had the paramedics talking about Renee's inconsistent statements right at the scene. Medical experts detailing the injuries, explaining why they couldn't be from a fall, showing the pattern of intentional harm.
And Lauren, Lily's mom.
Lily Furneaux testified. Emotional, obviously, but composed. She talked about Lily's bright life, but also her own growing fears, the changes she saw in Lily withdrawn, anxious, fearful after those visits. She laid out the signs she'd observed, the questions that were never answered, the toll it took trying to get someone to listen.
What about Renee's defense?
It appeared weak, according to the material. Her story kept shifting, unraveling in her cross-examination. She stuck to admitting maybe some rough handling when stressed, but denied any intent to harm.
But against the forensic evidence.
It just couldn't stand up. The injuries were too severe, too specific. They pointed directly to intentional harm.
The jury didn't take long, did they?
2 hours. That's it. Verdict, guilty on all charges.
Sentence?
Life in prison, no possibility of parole.
Did she appeal?
She did, but it was denied quickly. The sentence stood. For Lily's family, well, some measure of justice, maybe, but the grief, the pain, unimaginable.
What about Jeffrey, Lily's father?
Initially, he'd actually supported Renee, defended her, but eventually he distanced himself, filed for divorce after the trial. His role is described as complicated.
And there was some kind of confrontation in court.
Yeah, after the verdict. Lauren's brother confronted Jeffrey. It apparently escalated, involved Jeffrey pushing past an elderly woman, led to disorderly conduct charges for Lauren's brother. It just underscores the raw emotion, the impact on the whole family. So the criminal case concluded, but the story wasn't over.
Not at all. The trial, the conviction, it was significant, of course, but the impact rippled outwards. It forced conversations about child protection, about family courts, about the desperate need for change. The Justice for Lily movement really started to gain steam then. It became a call to action.
Yeah, a demand for better safeguards. And, exploring these difficult cases, understanding the systemic issues they uncover, it's so important. If these kinds of stories, the ones that ask the hard questions about why tragedies happen, resonate with you, you might find more deep dives like this over on the Dead Quiet Crime podcast. They really focus on digging into those systemic failures.
Absolutely. Because after the trial, the focus shifted again, didn't it? Back to the decisions made before Lily died. Specifically, Judge Michael Higgins.
He became the focus of intense public criticism. His handling of the custody case, approving and sticking with that arrangement despite the warnings, it all came under review.
He was accused of just disregarding Lauren's concerns, her documented worries about Lily's behavior, the unease, the marks.
Right, and apparently resisting or dismissing formal assessments from child welfare professionals who questioned that rotating custody for an infant. He reportedly just dug in his heels, favoring shared custody even as the red flags mounted.
His courtroom attitude, too, seen as dismissive. Skeptical of Lauren, maybe because she was a young single mother. Her requests for full custody were denied, her pleas minimized.
After Lily's death, Lauren didn't let it go. She filed a formal complaint against Judge Higgins with the Michigan Judicial Tenure Commission.
What did she cite?
His refusal to act on expert testimony, his failure to respond to her documented concerns, his overall conduct, basically everything that led up to the tragedy.
And the outcome of that complaint?
Nothing. No disciplinary action was taken. The commission reviewed it, closed the case, no consequences.
Oh, yeah.
And as the material says, this inaction sent a clear message.
Wow. So parallel to that, Lauren also filed a civil suit.
Yeah, against Renee and Jeffrey for negligence, seeking damages, trying to find accountability outside the criminal system. It was seen as a kind of test case. Could caregivers, maybe even the system, be held liable when clear concerns are ignored?
Do we know what happened with that suit?
No. The outcome was never made public. Whether it settled, was dismissed, resolved somehow, it's unknown. Another layer of frustration, of lack of closure for many.
It really underscores that this wasn't just about one person's actions. It was the cumulative effect of choices made by people in positions of authority. Choices that weren't challenged, that led to irreversible consequences.
Exactly. And it forced those bigger questions out into the open. How often are experts ignored in family court? How many parents feel totally alone, fighting the system? What needs to change fundamentally? It highlighted this broader crisis,
Warnings unheard, procedures prioritized over safety, court decisions with devastating impact. The public wanted answers not just about Lily, but about protecting all children better in the future.
That failure to act decisively really became a catalyst for reform advocates.
And that leads into the Justice for Lily movement. It wasn't just talk, it became a real force.
It really did. Born from grief, obviously, but fueled by this absolute need for change. Started small, grew fast. Advocates, experts, regular citizens got involved.
Their message was clear.
Simple and powerful. No child should fall through the cracks of the system meant to protect them. They organized vigils, held gatherings outside courthouses, quiet, determined, holding signs, photos, wrote letters, sparked public discussions. It wasn't just honoring Lily, it was demanding her experience never be repeated.
Did it lead to immediate new laws?
Not immediate major legislative reform, no. But the material stresses the impact was unmistakable. It forced conversations among judges, lawyers, policymakers, families. People started talking openly about custody decisions, the weight given to a parent's concerns, child welfare professionals speaking out more.
Issues that were maybe kept quiet before.
Exactly. Things like potential bias in court, how expert input is used unevenly, the lack of trauma-informed approaches. These were suddenly being debated publicly, intensely. Lily's case became the go-to example of how communication breakdowns and institutional foot-dragging can have fatal results.
And it empowered others too, right?
Hugely important point. The campaign gave others the confidence to step forward. Parents who felt silenced before started speaking up, joining groups, challenging the system. Lily's story gave them a language for their own experiences and an urgency to act. So this case, defined by such loss, actually became a blueprint for reform in some ways.
Yeah, it led to workshops, training discussions about judicial discretion, about empowering parents. The conversation shifted from just what went wrong here to, okay, how do we prevent this systemically?
It showed the power of collective awareness, a reminder that institutions need public trust, and when courts ignore clear warnings, people notice. That push for reflection, for change, it keeps growing, driven by people, not just policy papers.
And the source material really boils down the core flaw exposed here. It's about how we measure risk, how we handle concerns, where we place trust.
Prioritizing routine over responsibility, efficiency over empathy, waiting for absolute proof instead of acting on credible, documented concerns.
The lessons are just stark, unmistakable. When a parent raises concerns, they must be heard, not dismissed. When warning signs appear, they must be taken seriously, not explained away.
And when decisions about a child's life are being made, every voice matters, especially the person closest to that child. It's not just about assigning blame for the past, but about what could still be done to fix the system now.
Lily's case was a catalyst, a painful reckoning with blind spots. A reminder that vigilance isn't just policy, it's about being present, attentive, empathetic.
So wrapping up this deep dive, the tragic end for Lily Furneaux, the systemic failures laid bare, dismissed warnings, court inaction, the accountability gaps. It leaves you with this heavy heart, but also a sense of urgency.
Yeah, the main takeaway really is that devastating lesson. How critical it is to listen, truly listen to those closest to a child, to take every single warning sign seriously, and to demand that our protection systems work with empathy, with vigilance, not just procedure.
And that final thought from the sources really hits home. Silence protects nothing. Awareness changes everything.
It really does. If you want to explore more stories like Lily's, cases that delve into these complex systemic issues and demand awareness, please consider subscribing to the channel. Hearing these stories, understanding the context, it's part of how we push for that change.